To implement the avoid enemies mechanic, we first need to create an enemy. We'll navigate to our sprites folder, right click, go to create, sprites, and select a shape. We'll call this enemy. First we're going to drag it into our scene and highlight it as a different color. We want to add a collider so that the computer knows that our player has interacted with it. So with the enemy selected, we go to Add Component. We're going to search Collider. And for this shape, we're going to use a Box Collider 2D. We also want to tag the enemy so that when we collide with an object, we can check whether it's the enemy or something different. We go to Tag at the top, down to Add Tag, click the plus, and name the new tag enemy. Make sure to hit save, reselect your enemy, and then go to tag again to assign it. Now in our player script, which we can access by selecting our player and double clicking it in the inspector, or we can navigate to our scripts folder and double click it in the project window. So we've already got two methods. We have our void start that runs at the beginning of the game, and we have our void update that runs once per frame. So we're going to create a new one that runs whenever we enter a collider other than the player. So we're going to move down below the update, but remaining above this bracket, and we'll type void on collision enter 2D. So this will happen whenever we enter another collider that's 2D, and it will return or feed into here the actual collision that we interact with. So we're going to check if that collision and the game object it's attached to has a tag that is equal to the value of enemy. Then we create an open and close of our curly brackets, and in here we'll write the action we want to run if that condition is true. So in this instance, we're going to just simply destroy the player. We write destroy game object because game object will reference the object that this script is attached to, and in this instance that's the player. Make sure to press Ctrl S to save and return to Unity. Now if we hit play and we walk into the enemy, the player disappears and we've lost. However, we want this to act a little bit more like an enemy rather than a static obstacle. So we're going to create an empty game object by right-clicking in our hierarchy and create empty. We're going to call this enemy object. And what we're going to do is parent the enemy to this. So I'm going to click and drag the enemy on top of the enemy object so it has the small arrow next to the cursor, and it's now a child of this object, which means that if I move this object, then the enemy will move as well. But we want this to be centered on this object. Change these values to 0, then it's at the center of our enemy object. And if I move this master, so you can see that it's now at 5.18 on the X and 3.56 on the Y, and I select my enemy, that it's still at 0 and 0. Because the enemy, as a child of this object, is now using local translation. So its X and Y is local to the actual object it's a child of. This is going to help us create a short script that enables the enemy to move back and forth. So we'll put this down onto the floor. And on our enemy, we're going to add component called enemy script. And as we haven't made this yet, we click new script and create and add. We're going to find it in our assets folder, drag it into our scripts folder, and double click it to open in Visual Studio. Now we have our empty enemy script, we can use some similar components from our player script. So we'll start with our public float called speed. This will control how fast our enemy can move. And then we can go to player script, and we're going to take this exact same line for our movement. So we'll copy with Ctrl C and paste into our update. The one change we need to make is that we're not going to be controlling with an input, which we assign to the variable h in our player script, so we're going to delete that. If we were to save and play now, depending on our speed variable and what we set it to, our enemy will continuously move. If we set it above 0, so positive, it will move to the right, and if we set it below 0, negative, it will move to the left. So we want to change that depending on the position of our enemy. So we're going to create a new if statement. So if the transform dot local position dot x. So this is what we're going to be checking. It's the transform, so the position and rotation of our enemy. It's the local position as opposed to the global, so where it is in relation to its current position. And the x-axis is what we're going to be checking, whether it's moving left or right. So first we're going to say if it's lower than -3, so if it goes too far to the left, or we can use shift / to create these vertical lines, and having two of these creates an or in our if. If one condition is true or the other is true, then the action will run. And we're going to do the opposite. So we'll go transform dot local position dot x if it's greater than 3. So if it goes too far to the right. And we're simply going to say our speed value will be multiplied, so we use shift 8, multiplied equals -1. If you multiply anything by -1, then it becomes the opposite of itself on the positive or negative. So 3 multiplied by -1 becomes -3, -3 multiplied by -1 becomes 3. So now we can save and go back to Unity, select our enemy, and set the speed above 0. If we play the game, you'll notice that our enemy moves back and forth between the two values. And if you look in the X, then you can see it's continuously bouncing between -3 and 3. And we can control these parameters. Now the reason that we made it a child of the object is so that we don't have to change that continuously. So now we can select the object and we could move our enemy further in, and it will still move the same distance from that central point. So it will move 3 to the right, bounce back, and move 3 to the left and bounce back.